take a moment, wherever you are right now, to let your body feel the surface beneath you. Feel the gentle press of the mattress, or the cushion, or the firm reassurance of wherever it is you have chosen to rest tonight. Feel how it holds you. Feel how it takes your weight without complaint, without hesitation, just quietly, patiently, the way that good things have always held us up. There is nothing you need to do right now. There is no task waiting for your attention at the edge of your mind. Whatever it is, that email, that appointment, that thing you meant to say to someone, that thing you meant to do before the week is over, it can wait. It has waited this long, and it can wait a little longer. Right now, in this moment, you are allowed to simply be here, to simply breathe. So breathe in slowly. Let the air come in all the way down, past your chest, until you feel your belly rise. Hold it there for just a moment, just a gentle pause, and then let it go. Let it drift away from you like wood smoke on a still evening, like the last thin thread of steam rising off a cup of tea gone cool. Good, just like that. We are going to go somewhere tonight. Somewhere very far away. Not in terms of miles, though we will travel many of those slowly, slowly in the way of this story, but in terms of time. We are going to let the years peel back. We are going to let the noise and light of this century fade, the way a candle fades when you cup your hand around it and carry it up a staircase, its little flame trembling and brave. We are going to find ourselves in England in the 1830s, not in the grand salons of London, not in the chambers of Parliament, not in the gleaming offices of men who shaped empires. We are going to find ourselves in a field, a real field, a field with mud and morning frost and the heavy, warm, breathing smell of sheep, many, many sheep, as they are gathered in the grey hour before the sun has fully committed to rising. This is a story about ordinary things. It is a story about the slow migration of a flock from the low winter pastures to the high summer grazing grounds of the hills. It is a story that happened in some form or another every single year for centuries, unremarked, unrecorded in any history book, and yet it was as much a part of the rhythm of England as the turning of seasons, as the sound of church bells drifting across a valley on a Sunday morning. It is a very, very slow story, and that is exactly what it is supposed to be. Let your eyes close if they want to. Let the muscles of your face soften. Let the small tension in your jaw, that little habitual clenching you may not have even noticed was there, let it go. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands uncurl. We are going back, slowly, gently, all the way back. Imagine you are stepping through a low wooden gate. The gate is weathered to a soft silver grey, the grey of driftwood, of old stone walls, and it swings open on a hinge so well oiled and so long practised that it makes almost no sound at all. Just a faint low creak, like a floorboard settling in the dark. It is the very early morning. The sky above you is that particular shade of deep blue, not yet black, not yet the washed-out pearl of dawn, that belongs only to the hour between 3 and 4 in the morning. You know this shade if you have ever been awake to see it. It is a solemn colour, a quiet colour, a colour that seems to hold its breath. The stars are out. They are remarkable here in this England of the 1830s because there are no electric lights, not anywhere. No orange glow on the horizon, no sodium haze above a distant town. The darkness is real and honest darkness, and within it the stars are impossibly thick and bright. They crowd the sky from edge to edge. You can see the Milky Way as a solid brushstroke overhead, a smear of ancient light that is almost too beautiful to look at for long. The air is cold. It is April, the migration time. And April in the northern counties of England is a creature of two minds. During the day it will be mild, maybe even warm in the sheltered dips and hollows of the land. But now at this hour it is proper cold, a cold that has weight to it, a cold that settles on your cheeks like cool, damp hands. You can see your breath. It comes out in soft white plumes that drift and disperse and are gone, and then you breathe again and make another, and that one too drifts and is gone. You're standing in a field at the edge of a small farm. The farm is to your left, a cluster of stone buildings, low and thick-walled, the way buildings are in places where the wind knows what it is doing. The farmhouse itself is dark at this hour. The windows are small and deep-set, as if the house is squinting against a perpetual weather that it knows will come even if it is not here yet. The walls are limestone, and in the faint starlight they are almost white. The thatch on the roof is deep and dark, and there are places where the thatch has been patched with newer straw that is a lighter colour than the old, so that the roof has a kind of dappled quality, the way a horse can be dappled, light and dark, light and dark. From somewhere inside, somewhere behind those small dark windows, you can smell, just faintly, the remnants of last night's fire. It is wood smoke and something else. Peat, perhaps. Dried peat, which burns slowly and holds its heat and gives off a smell that is thick and brown and ancient, a smell that has been part of farmhouse mornings in this country since before there were farmhouses at all. And beneath that, beneath the smoke and the peat, there is another smell, the smell that has been there all along waiting for you to notice it. It is the smell of sheep, of many, many sheep. It is not an unpleasant smell, once you have lived with it long enough. It is the smell of lanolin, the oil in the wool, and of dry grass, and of something almost sweet, like new hay. It is a warm smell, a biological smell, the smell of living creatures breathing slowly in the dark, their breath rising in hundreds of small white plumes that join together above the flock like a single communal exhalation, like the flock is one large, slow-breathing thing rather than 400 individual, small, slow-breathing things. And that is what you're here for on this cold April morning before the sun has made up its mind. The flock, the sheep, the long, slow walk to the high summer pastures. Let your breathing slow a little more. There is no hurry here. There never was any hurry here. The whole story you're about to hear is a story about the complete absence of hurry, and so we might as well begin it that way. His name is Thomas. We will call him Thomas because it was a very common name in rural England in the 1830s. Common enough that in any given village you might find 3 or 4 Thomases, all of them answering to it without confusion, all of them knowing which Thomas they were by the way the name was spoken. Thomas the shepherd's son, Thomas at the back end of the lane, Thomas with the black dog. Thomas is 34 years old. He does not look 34, which is to say that he looks both older and younger than that number suggests. His skin is the colour and texture of cured leather, browned and lined by years of weather and sun, and wind and cold. His hands are remarkable, large and rough, with knuckles that are swollen at the joints from cold weather, and from the constant handling of rough wool, and wooden crooks and stone walls, but his eyes are young. They are the pale grey-blue of a shallow sea on a cloudy day, and they are attentive and quick and slightly crinkled at the corners from a lifetime of squinting into distances, watching for the individual movement of an individual sheep that tells him something is wrong, something needs attention, something needs the quiet authority of a good shepherd. He has been a shepherd his whole life. His father was a shepherd before him, and his grandfather before that, and somewhere back in the unrecorded generations, his line goes back to men and women who kept sheep in these same hills without a name for what they were or a word for what the hills were called. It is simply what the family does. It is what they know how to do. This morning, Thomas is standing at the edge of the fold, the sheep pen, where the flock has been gathered since yesterday evening. He has his crook in his left hand. The crook is made of ash wood, pale and smooth, and the hook at the top is carved from a ram's horn that has been steamed until it could be bent and shaped, then allowed to harden around a wooden mould. The hook is elegant in the way that purely functional things sometimes are. The curve of it is the exact curve needed to catch a sheep around the neck or hind leg without causing injury, and every shepherd's crook is a little different because every shepherd's hand is a little different, and a crook is fitted to the hand that will carry it the way a good boot is fitted to the foot. His dog is beside him. The dog is a border collie, though that is not quite what they are called yet. The formal breed designation won't come for another few decades. For now she is simply a good sheepdog, and her name is Nell. She is black and white, with one eye of deep amber, and one eye of pale grey-blue that is almost white, which is called a walleye, and is not considered a flaw but simply a feature, a particularity like a freckle. She is lying down at Thomas's feet, but she is not relaxed in the way that dogs relax when they truly have nothing to do. She's lying in a kind of coiled readiness, chin on her forepaws, eyes tracking the flock with a professional intensity that never quite switches off. She has been bred and trained and lived her entire life for this work, this morning, this flock. She is, in her own way, as much a professional as Thomas. Thomas is looking at the sky. He does this every morning of his life, not as a habit or an affectation, but as a genuine and necessary act of intelligence gathering. The sky is the newspaper of the shepherd's world. It tells him what today will be, what tomorrow might be, what the week is shaping up to become. He reads cloud formations and wind directions the way you might read words on a page, not consciously decoding them symbol by symbol, but absorbing them whole, understanding them before he could say quite how he understands them. This morning the ski tells him, cold now, but clearing. A good day for a walk. He reaches into the pocket of his smock, the long loose linen overgarment that almost every working man in rural England wears, that serves as both overall and coat, and takes out a piece of bread. He has eaten already this morning in the kitchen in the dark, sitting across from his wife Eleanor, who is not a woman given to unnecessary speech at 4 a.m, but who had set the bread and the hard yellow cheese and the small jug of cold water on the table without being asked, because she has been doing this on migration days for 12 years and knows as well as he does what needs to happen and when. The bread is dense and slightly sour, a rye and barley loaf that Eleanor bakes every few days in the bread oven at the side of the hearth, an oven heated by burning furs and then raked out so that the bread can be slid in on a long wooden peel and left to bake in the residual heat. The loaf comes out dense and dark and chewy, with a hard crust that would break a lesser person's teeth, but which Thomas bites through without a second thought. He eats the bread slowly, standing in the dark, looking at the sky, and Nell watches him with an expression that is not quite hunger. She has eaten already too, a portion of cold mutton stew from last night, but is more a kind of alert attentiveness, a keeping of track. He finishes the bread, brushes the crumbs from his hands, tucks the crook under his arm, and looks at the flock. 437 sheep. He knows this number because he counted them last evening when they were folded, and because he has counted them, or very nearly this many of them, for each of the 11 previous spring migrations he has overseen. He knows these sheep the way you might know the faces of 437 particular friends. He does not know their individual names. There are not 437 names for sheep, but he knows their individual characters. He knows which ones push to the front and which ones hang back. He knows the ones who are prone to panic, the ones who are steady and reliable and can be counted on to keep moving in the right direction, even when the younger, stupider animals want to investigate a hedge or turn back toward a memory of home. He knows, above all, the led ewe. Her name is Fleet, though she's not especially fast, not any more. She's 6 years old and has settled into a deliberate, measured pace that makes her invaluable. And she stands near the gate of the fold, her ears forward, her breath pluming in the cold air. Fleet is the anchor of the whole enterprise. Where Fleet goes, the others will follow. This is not sentiment. It is fact. Sheep are deeply, profoundly social animals, and within a flock there is a hierarchy as complex and stable as the hierarchy of any human village. Fleet is at the top of it. She has been at the top of it since she was 3 years old, and demonstrated to the satisfaction of the other sheep that she knew where the good grass was and how to find shelter before the rain came. Thomas looks at Fleet. Fleet looks at Thomas. This is a conversation. It does not involve words. It barely involves, strictly speaking, eye contact, because sheep, unlike dogs, are not naturally eye contact animals. Their eyes are on the sides of their heads, designed for watching for predators from a wide angle, rather than focusing on a single point in front of them. But Fleet has learned, over 6 years of this relationship, what a certain quality of Thomas's stillness means. It means we are going. And Fleet has learned to recognize that stillness the way a well-seasoned sailor recognizes the quality of a wind that means the tide is about to turn. Thomas opens the gate of the fold. Let the image settle around you like a blanket. Let yourself feel the cold morning air, the faint grey lightening of the sky in the east, just a smudge of paler blue above the dark line of the hills, just the first suggestion of a sun that is not yet ready to commit. The sheep come out slowly. This is always the way of it. There is never a rushing, crashing torrent of animals all at once. Instead, Fleet comes first, stepping through the gate with a kind of measured dignity. She pauses, just for a moment, outside the gate, lifting her nose to read the air, turning her head slightly to take in the whole wide field ahead of her. Then she walks forward, and the others follow. They come out in a stream that is slow and rhythmic, the way water comes out of a very slow tap, 1, then 2 together, then a gap, then 3, then a single one that pauses at the gate just as Fleet did, sniffs the air, and then catches up. The sound of them is extraordinary at this close range. Each individual sheep makes almost no sound. A faint bleat here and there, the soft percussion of hooves on the hard-packed earth of the fold's entrance. But 437 sheep together make a sound that is more felt than heard. It is a bass hum, almost, a presence in the chest, the sound of all those hooves on the ground, the sound of all that wool shifting and rustling as they move past each other, the sound of all that breathing. It accumulates into something that is less like a noise and more like a quality of the air itself. Nell does not move yet. She waits, watching as the flock spreads itself out of the fold and begins to gather in the field. She watches the edges of the flock, always the edges, never the middle, for signs of straying, for the particular sidelong step of a sheep that has decided to be somewhere else. She will not move until Thomas gives her the signal, and Thomas will not give her the signal until the flock is fully out of the fold and beginning to settle into its natural shape. A loose oval, slightly elongated in the direction of travel, Fleet at the front. This settling takes perhaps 15 minutes. 15 minutes in the dark, in the cold, as the sky very gradually grows less dark in the east and the stars very gradually begin to fade. Not all at once, but one by one. The faintest ones first, the brightest ones last. Orion going in pieces, the plough surrendering its stars like a gambler losing a slow game. Thomas moves to the left flank of the flock. His assistant, a boy of 16 named William, his sister's son learning the trade, moves to the right flank. William has been on migrations before, 2 of them, but he is still young enough and inexperienced enough that he watches Thomas constantly, taking his cues from the older man's posture, his pace, the direction of his gaze. Thomas gives a single quiet word to Nell. "Away!" It is a herding command. Away to me means go wide to the right, circle behind the flock, come up on the far side. But Thomas says just the one word, the shortened form, and Nell is already moving before the last sound of it has left his lips. She moves in the way that good sheepdogs move when they are working, low to the ground, her belly nearly brushing the grass, her path a wide, quiet arc that takes her well around the outside of the flock so that no individual sheep sees her coming until she's already in position behind them. The flock begins to move. Let your breathing find the rhythm of the walk, long, slow breaths. In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. The walking pace of sheep is not a hurried pace. It is a measured, patient, utterly unhurried pace that covers ground without seeming to be trying to cover ground, the way that sleep itself covers the hours of the night without you noticing that time is passing. The first part of the route is along the lane. The lane is sunken, what they call a hollow way, or sometimes a drover's road, cut deep into the land by centuries of use, by the passing of countless previous flocks in countless previous Aprils, by the hooves of cattle and horses and the feet of people walking to market and to church and to the next village and the one after that. The banks on either side are higher than your head. They are thick with last year's dead vegetation, the dry brown stalks of cow parsley and hogweed and dock, stiff as wire. And here and there a hawthorn tree has seeded itself into the bank and grown sideways, its branches reaching across the lane like the arm of someone wanting to shake hands. The mud in the lane is extraordinary. It is not the casual mud of a wet path. It is deep, worked mud, the mud of many hooves over many seasons, and it has a particular smell that is very distinctive and not quite unpleasant, earthy and wet and slightly fermented, the smell of the lane's long history of use, the smell of all those seasons composted into each other. It sticks to the hooves of the sheep with a soft sucking sound, a sound that is almost musical in its regularity. Step, suck, step, suck, step, suck, 437 times, over and over, building into a kind of low, wet percussion. The lane is narrow enough that the flock fills it completely. If you were coming from the other direction, and no one is at this hour, you would hear the flock long before you could see it. You would hear that low, wet percussion, and the soft collective breath, and the very occasional bleat, and then you would see the pale shapes of the sheep emerging from the dark like something being slowly revealed. But there is no one coming from the other direction. Thomas walks just behind and to the left of the middle of the flock, which puts him roughly a third of the way back from Fleet. He walks at the pace of the flock, which is a pace of perhaps 2 miles an hour on flat ground. He does not try to hurry them. In a narrow lane, trying to hurry sheep only creates confusion. The front ones slow down to investigate something. The ones behind pile up against them. A small bottleneck forms, and then in resolving the bottleneck a few sheep turn sideways and nothing moves at all. Thomas has learned, as every experienced shepherd has learned, that the fastest way to move sheep is to move them slowly. Let them set the pace, trust the lead you, follow the rhythm. He has an iron lantern hanging from his crook. The lantern is small and battered, and inside it a tallow candle burns with a small steady flame. Tallow is beef or mutton fat, rendered and set into a mould, a cheaper and more pungent alternative to beeswax. The candle gives off a faint smell of something between cooked meat and old grease, a smell that Thomas has known all his life and therefore barely notices. The light it gives is not much. It illuminates a small circle of lane around Thomas's feet and the feet of the nearest sheep, enough to see where to put his feet, enough to notice if a sheep stumbles or sits down. William, on the far side of the flock, has a similar lantern. From where you stand, you can see the 2 small amber lights moving through the darkness like signals, like slow fireflies, like the eyes of some very large, very calm animal making its way along a path it has travelled many times before. The lane begins to rise, gently at first, just the faintest increase in the effort of walking, but you can feel it in the legs after a while, the way a long, gradual hill makes itself known. The land on either side of the sunken lane is invisible, just dark above the banks, but Thomas knows it. He knows every field on either side of this lane, knows their names. The Long Acre, the Wet Field, Blackthorn Bottom, the Monk's Piece, knows what grows in them and what drainage problems each one has, and where the badger setts are and where the fox raised cubs last summer. This landscape is not a landscape to him, it is a map, and the map is inside him, worn smooth with use. The sheep ahead of him are pale shapes moving through the dark. Nell is invisible. She's working the edges of the flock in the shadows, and you only know she's there from the occasional small adjustment a group of straying sheep makes, drawing back from the edge as if gently reminded. Everything is very quiet except for the flock, breathe in the cold air. Let the backs of your eyes feel heavy. Let the weight of your body settle a little deeper into wherever it is you are resting. The sky begins to change. It happens slowly, so slowly that if you try to watch it directly, you will miss it, the way you miss the movement of the minute hand on a clock. It is only when you look away and look back that you find things have shifted. The deep blue of the pre-dawn begins to lighten along the eastern horizon. Not to pink, not yet. That will come later. First, it lightens to a kind of pale steel colour, the colour of the sky reflected in a still grey river, and in this paler sky the hills become visible. Not illuminated, just visible. Shapes, at first. The line of the ridge above the valley, the rounded hump of the far hill, the dark, ragged silhouette of a stand of old oaks on the slope, and then very gradually the valley comes back. It assembles itself out of the dark piece by piece, the way a room assembles itself when your eyes have adjusted to the dark and you start to see the shapes of things rather than just the darkness between things. The stone walls appear, long horizontal grey lines crossing the slopes. The hedgerows appear, dark and thick along the field boundaries. The scattered farmsteads appear, still with their windows dark, their chimneys not yet smoking because the fires have not yet been lit. The lane levels out at the top of its first rise, and here it meets a wider road. The drove road itself, the old track that runs from the low-lying winter pastures to the high summer grazings on the hills. This track is ancient. Not old in the way that Victorian buildings are old, or even in the way that a Georgian farmhouse is old. Ancient in the way that the land itself is old, worn into the earth by use that began before anyone was recording such things, before anyone thought to write down the routes that people walked to move their animals from one season's grazing to the next. Thomas turns the flock onto the drove road, and there is a brief moment of adjustment as the sheep make the transition from the tight confines of the lane to the wider track. Fleet walks steadily on, but a cluster of younger sheep at the rear of the flock tries to spread sideways, drawn by the wider space and the new smells of a different piece of ground. Nell is there before Thomas needs to give a command. She appears from the left side of the flock, low and quick, her presence alone enough to draw the strays back in. No nipping, no chasing, just her presence. The particular quality of attention that a working sheepdog directs at sheep, which sheep understand at a level more primal than thought. The flock settles onto the drove road, and now the pace changes slightly. The drove road is better ground, firmer underfoot, less of the deep mud of the lane, and level enough that the sheep can find their stride. Fleet sets a pace that is just slightly faster than she was walking in the lane, not because she is eager, but because the ground allows it, and the flock spreads itself along the road into a shape that experienced shepherds call the ribbon, a long, loose, elongated shape, 3 or 4 sheep wide and 100 yards long, moving like a slow river of wool along the road. The smell of the flock is very strong now in the still morning air, the lanolina, the warm breath, the particular earthen smell of sheep hooves on damp ground. But mixed in with it now are the smells of the countryside waking up around you. The smell of damp earth warming very slightly as the light increases. The smell of last night's frost releasing itself from the grass as the temperature climbs its first degree. The smell of, yes, there. is that meadowsweet in the hedge. Too early for flowers, but the leaves are there, and meadowsweet leaves have a faint scent even before the flowers come. A green, slightly almondy smell that is one of the subtlest pleasures of an English hedgerow in spring. A blackbird begins to sing, just one from somewhere deep in the hawthorn hedge to the right. He is invisible. You could not find him in all that dark tangled vegetation if you tried, but his song is completely clear. It comes in long, liquid phrases, each one slightly different from the last, each one a kind of free improvisation on the theme of being a blackbird at dawn in an April hedgerow. The song has nothing to do with you, or with Thomas, or with 437 sheep walking slowly along a drove road. The blackbird sings because this is what he does at this hour, and because his territory is this stretch of hedge, and because the light is changing and something in the light tells him that it is time. But his song goes with you as you walk. It follows you along the hedge and then falls behind as the hedge moves away from the road, and then there is a gap of quiet, and then another blackbird picks it up ahead. Or perhaps it is a song thrush this time, slightly higher and more repetitive, and the soundtrack of the morning builds one bird at a time. Let the sound of birds carry you. Let the imagined sounds layer themselves gently behind your closed eyes. The liquid ripple of the blackbird, the thin, clear call of a robin in a nearby tree, the far-off sound of rooks in a stand of elms, a sound like distant, argumentative laughter, and underneath all of it, always, the soft, rhythmic sound of the flock. By the time the sun is properly up meaning the full bright circle of it is clear of the horizon, which in April takes about 40 minutes from first light to full dawn, the flock has covered 3 miles. 3 miles in 4 hours if you count from when they first set out. This seems slow. It is slow. Thomas is not troubled by this. He has walked this route many times, and he knows that 3 miles in the first 4 hours is a good morning's pace, because the first hours are always the hardest. The sheep need to settle into the rhythm of the walk. They need to get past the first mile, which is always the most difficult, the mile in which they most strongly feel the pull of the fold behind them, the familiar smells of home, the habitual pathways of their daily life. Past the first mile, something changes in the flock. You can feel it if you're paying attention. A subtle shift in the quality of the movement. The way a stream changes when it gets past the first rocky stretch and finds the smooth channel it has carved for itself over time. The sheep stop trying to turn back. They stop sending out those exploratory sideways movements that test the patience of the shepherd and the alertness of the dog. They simply walk. It is time for the first rest. Thomas knows a particular spot where the drove road runs alongside a long stone wall, a wall that is so old that its original purpose has been entirely forgotten, though the wall itself remains, moss-covered and slightly subsided in places, leaning at an angle like a very old man who has not quite decided whether to sit down yet. The wall provides shelter from the north wind, which is not fierce this morning, just present, just noticeable. In the lee of the wall the air is a few degrees warmer, and the grass at the base of the wall is thicker and greener than the grass elsewhere, protected from the worst of the cold by the mass of the stone. Thomas calls the flock to a halt with a sound that is not quite a word, a particular low, carrying sound that experienced shepherds make, and that functions as a sort of general address to the entire flock, a settle down, we are stopping sound. Fleet hears it and slows, and the flock concertinas gently from front to back as the animals at the front slow and the animals behind catch up, and then they all stop gradually, almost like a single organism deciding to rest. Thomas sits down against the wall. He takes from his pack a waxed canvas sack slung over one shoulder, a piece of cheese wrapped in a cloth, another piece of bread, and a small stoneware flask of weak tea. The tea was made before he left this morning, poured into the flask while it was still hot, and it is now merely warm, but warmth is enough. He drinks it slowly. It tastes of tea and of the particular mineral quality of the stoneware flask, a taste that is so familiar to him that he no longer notices it. It is simply what tea tastes like when it comes from this flask on a migration day. William sits a few yards away, eating his own provisions, bread and cold bacon wrapped in a cloth by his mother the evening before. William is at the age where everything is slightly uncomfortable. His body is changing in ways he does not entirely understand. The world is full of things he does not yet know how to navigate. But here, on this road, with this flock, with the sun just up and the cold loosening and the countryside spread out below him, he feels something that he will not have a name for until much later in his life, when he will call it contentment. Nell lies close to Thomas, but not on him. She does not lean against him, or put her head in his lap in the way of dogs that have been taught to be companions first and workers second. She lies a yard away, facing the flock, still watching, still noting. There is something in her manner that is very like a professional who has taken a break but has not quite switched off. A nurse sitting down for lunch who cannot stop glancing at the ward. A sailor resting below deck who is still listening for the change in the sound of the sea. The sheep are resting too after their fashion. Sheep do not lie down the way dogs lie down, not during a rest stop on a journey. They stand and graze, or they stand and do very little, their lower jaws working slowly in that rhythmic chewing motion that is called rumination, and that is, in its way, one of the most deeply relaxing things to watch in the natural world. The jaw moves slowly and steadily. The eyes are half closed. The ears flick occasionally at a sound or a fly. The whole body is relaxed in a way that only an animal with no predators in the immediate vicinity can fully relax. That is, not entirely, but enough. You can hear them, even from here. That soft collective chewing, that gentle percussion, and the wind in the stone wall, a very faint sound, almost a whisper. Let the morning open up around you. After the rest, the flock sets off again. The middle of the morning is the easiest walking. The sun is up now, and it does what a good April sun does. It provides warmth without intensity, a gentle, even light that picks out the colours of the land with something like kindness. The grass is bright green, a particular saturated green that only comes in April, before the summer has had time to bleach it. The stone walls catch the light and become a warm honey colour, that limestone warmth that makes the English countryside feel almost Mediterranean in the right conditions, almost as if the whole landscape is pleased with itself for looking as good as it does. The drove road climbs steadily now, not steeply. This is not mountain country, not yet, but with a long, gradual rise that will continue, with occasional level stretches and 1 or 2 brief dips into a fold of the land for the next 6 miles. 6 miles of gradual ascent. The hills ahead, the high pastures where the flock will spend the summer, are visible from here on clear days, a dark line above the nearer hills, and on this clear April morning you can see them. The high moors, treeless and open, their colour that particular purple-brown of heather in its off-season, waiting for July to turn it bright. The sheep do not look at the hills, they look at the ground and the hedge and each other. Fleet walks with her eyes forward and slightly down, which is her default mode. She is following the road because the road is the path of least resistance, and because somewhere in her memory, or in the memory of her muscle and her feet, which is a different thing, she knows this road. She has walked it every spring for 5 of her 6 years. She knows, in the way that animals know things that they cannot explain, that the road goes upward and that at the end of the upward there is good grass. It is not a plan. It is not anticipation. It is something older and more reliable than either of those things. Thomas walks at his steady pace, his crook in his hand, his gaze moving constantly over the flock. He watches for the signs of trouble that a shepherd watches for. The ewe who is walking slightly unevenly, suggesting a stone in the hoof. The sheep who keeps turning her head to look behind her, suggesting she's about to turn back. The pair who are walking too close together at the edge of the flock, which often means they are planning, in their limited ovine way, to make a break for a particularly interesting piece of hedge. But there are no signs of trouble this morning. The flock is walking well. The weather is good. The ground is firm. Thomas allows himself the small luxury of not worrying and simply walks. He thinks, in a way that is more feeling than thought, about the field he is walking toward. The high field, they call it simply that, the high field, though it has a proper name on their state map somewhere, is 400 acres of open hill grazing, bounded by dry stone walls on 3 sides and open to the moorland on the 4th. The grass up there is different from the grass in the valley. It is shorter and tougher and more nutritious in its dryness, the way certain small concentrated foods are more nutritious than their larger watered-down cousins. The sheep do well up there. They fill out through the summer, their fleeces growing thick and slow in the hill air, and when Thomas brings them back down in October, they are different animals from the ones he takes up in April. Fuller, calmer, their eyes deeper, their step more assured. He thinks about his wife Eleanor. He thinks about her the way he often thinks about her when he is walking. Not in any complicated narrative way, not with any particular agenda of feeling, but simply a sense of her, a warmth that is like the warmth of the flask of tea. She will be in the yard by now, he reckons, feeding the chickens and the 2 house pigs. She will have the fire going in the kitchen. She will have the older children off to school. Their village has a small school now, a recent development that still fills Thomas with a complicated feeling that is part pride and part displacement, and she will have the baby on her hip. The baby is 10 months old and deeply unremarkable in the way that healthy, satisfied babies are unremarkable. He eats, he sleeps, he looks at things with an expression of absolute, uncritical interest, and occasionally he laughs at something no one else can see. Thomas smiles slightly, walking behind his flock in the morning sunlight. He is a happy man, not in any dramatic way, not in a way that would make a story, but in the slow, accumulated way that a life built on useful work and honest love and a deep familiarity with the same piece of land can build happiness, brick by ordinary brick, until one day it is simply there, the way a wall is simply there when enough stones have been placed. Let your mind drift along the top of the hedge. Let it follow the long tangled line of it, the hawthorn and the blackthorn and the elder, and the occasional oak that has been allowed to grow full-sized at intervals along the hedge's length, its roots binding the bank, its branches spreading into the field on one side and the road on the other. The oak is old, its bark is deeply furrowed and dark, the colour of dried earth, and the furrows themselves are filled with moss, a thick, velvety moss, the bright green of new growth, that lives in those channels the way a small animal lives in a burrow, sheltered from the worst of everything by the deep walls of bark on either side. The hedge is the library of the countryside. This is not a romantic exaggeration. The hawthorn hedgerows of England are among the most important habitats in the country. They are home to insects in numbers beyond counting. They provide shelter for birds and small mammals. They hold the water and the soil, and they record in their very composition the history of the land they border. A hedge that contains many different species of woody plant, hawthorn, blackthorn, field maple, hazel, dog rose, is an old hedge. The more species, the older the hedge. This particular hedge, running alongside the Drove Road, contains 7 species that Thomas could name, and several more that he knows by their leaves or their berries without having ever been given their proper names. A botanist from Oxford, presented with this hedge, would estimate it at somewhere between 600 and 800 years old. Thomas would simply say, "It has always been there," which is, in its way, the more accurate statement. The hawthorn is in the earliest stages of coming into leaf. The buds have broken and the new leaves are tiny, small, deeply lobed shapes, brilliant green, clustered along the dark stems like the smallest possible hands. There are no blossoms yet. The blossom, the May blossom, the blossom after which the month of May is arguably named, will come in another 3 weeks, perhaps 4, depending on the warmth of the coming days. When it does come, it will transform this hedge from something dark and structural into something so abundantly, extravagantly white that it seems almost excessive. A hedge in full hawthorn blossom looks like a hedge that has been decorated for a celebration, dressed up beyond what any reasonable hedge needs to be, as if the hawthorn cannot help but produce more beauty than the situation strictly requires. But today it is still bare-branched and budding, and in its bare state you can see things in the hedge that the leaves will soon hide. You can see the old nests from last year, a blackbird's nest tucked in the deep fork of a blackthorn, a perfect cup of mud and grass, now grey and sagging with the winter's rain. You can see the galls on the wild rose stems, round and bristly, bright orange even in winter, the bedagars, made by a tiny wasp that laid her eggs inside the rose's tissue, and stimulated it to grow this alien structure around them, this strange orange globe that is at once the wasp's nursery and the rose's wound. You can see the long arching briars of the dog rose, their thorns curved like small cat's claws, reaching out into the road at exactly the height to catch on the wool of a passing sheep. The sheep do catch. This is a regular small drama of the hedgerow migration. A briar catches in a fleece, the sheep keeps walking, the briar pulls, the sheep turns slightly, the briar holds, the sheep, now annoyed, pulls harder, and either the briar loses its grip on the wool, or a small tuft of wool remains behind, snagged on the thorns, fluttering in the morning breeze like a miniature white flag. These small flags of wool accumulate along the hedge through the migration season, not just from Thomas's flock, but from every flock that uses this road, until there is a kind of running decoration of white fluff at sheep height along the whole length of the hawthorn, a record in the most ephemeral possible medium of the passage of animals through this corridor. Birds notice. Certain birds in the later months will work these snags of wool into their nests. The long-tailed tit, in particular, lines her extraordinary purse-shaped nest with feathers and wool and spider silk, and the wool from the hawthorn hedge is a convenient and well-positioned resource. In this way, indirectly and without intention on anyone's part, Thomas's flock contributes to the comfort of the long-tailed tit's eggs. The world is full of these small, unwitnessed transactions. William, on the right flank, has been watching the hedge with the sideways, half-unconscious attention of someone who grew up in this countryside and learned its contents the way you learn the furniture of your own house, not by studying it, but simply by living alongside it. He notices the old blackbird's nest. He notices a rabbit sitting in the gap at the base of the hedge, motionless, watching the flock with the rigid, vibrating stillness of prey animals, in the presence of something that might be dangerous, but has not quite committed to being so. The rabbit calculates, in its rapid, instinctive way, whether the flock is worth fleeing from, and determines that it is not, and remains. William also notices, because he is 16 and cannot help noticing, a cluster of primroses at the base of the hedge. Primroses are among the earliest spring flowers, blooming in pale yellow clusters at the bottom of hedges and in sheltered hollows where the frost does not linger too long. And their colour at this time of year, in this landscape of brown and grey and the just appearing green, is startling. Not a demanding colour, not the loud yellow of a daffodil, but a quiet candlelit yellow, the yellow of old cream or new butter, a yellow that looks as if it is generating its own small warmth. William thinks, not quite in words, of a girl he has recently become aware of in the village. He would not be able to say quite why primroses make him think of her. They just do. He walks on, slightly red in the face, though there is no one to see it. Let yourself rest in the idea of the road. Let the road carry you. The drove road Thomas is walking today is not a road in the way we use that word, not a maintained official thing. It is a road in the older sense, a route, a way through, a path created entirely by the action of feet upon ground, repeated so many times over so many centuries that the ground eventually accepted the implication and became a road. It is possible, it is more than possible, it is likely that this particular route, this particular line between the low valley and the high summer pasture, was first walked by animals before humans used it. Cattle, perhaps, or the aurochs that preceded domesticated cattle. Enormous, long-horned wild cattle that ranged across Britain in the post-glacial period, finding their own routes up the seasonal grazing gradients, following the green, following the warmth, retreating before the cold. Their paths, worn over millennia, would have been the obvious routes when the first pastoral people arrived with their own animals and needed to do the same thing. The routes were already there. The drove roads grew from something older than the drovers themselves, And when the Romans arrived and began their tremendous program of road building, those straight, disciplined, engineered roads that still cross England in their purposeful lines, they built their roads in the valleys and across the plains where the engineering was manageable. The old drove routes winding up the hillsides following the contours of the land were left to continue as they always had. The Romans had no particular use for a road that went nowhere but a sheep pasture, so the drove roads kept their age. They accumulated time without being modernized. They were used as they always had been used, and they kept their shape in the land, and the shape kept their history. Thomas walks this history without knowing it. He knows the road in the way of personal and family experience. His father walked it, and his father before him, and, somewhere back in the unrecorded generations, the first of his line who was given charge of these particular sheep on this particular land walked it too, and made the same turn at the big oak, and paused at the same wide gate to count his flock through. Thomas's knowledge of the road is immediate and personal. He is not thinking about Romans or aurochs, but the road contains all of that nonetheless. It contains it the way a very old stone wall contains the hands that placed each stone, though those hands are long gone. The road is the record. The road is the argument that the past makes for its own continuing relevance. Not an argument in words, not an argument that requires anyone to listen, just the simple, persistent fact of its being there. In the 1830s, the drove roads are already beginning to change. The railways are coming, not here yet, not to this particular valley, but coming, the way a change in the weather comes before it arrives, felt in the pressure, sensed in the smell of the air. The railways will change everything eventually. They will mean that cattle and sheep can be moved in hours rather than days. The drovers, the men who made their entire living by walking animals hundreds of miles from Scotland to the markets of the south of England, will be out of work within a generation. The long purposeful tramping of their lives will be replaced by the bewildered confusion of animals loaded into wagons for the first time and arriving at their destination in a state of profound disorientation. But that is the future, and the future has not arrived yet and will not arrive today, and today there is only the road and the flock and the good April morning. The drove road is not entirely empty as they walk it. They pass in the morning a carter coming the other way, a man with a heavy horse-drawn cart loaded with what appears to be seed oats heading down to the valley farms. The horse is a big, patient Shire type, dark brown, its mane plaited with a strand of red cord in the way of working horses on market days. The carter nods to Thomas. Thomas nods back. No words are exchanged, but the nod carries the whole content of two people who have seen each other on this road every spring for 10 years and know everything they need to know about each other for the purposes of this encounter. The horse and cart pass through the flock without drama. The sheep part around it with that fluid, indifferent pragmatism that sheep display when faced with large, familiar objects. They step aside, they continue walking, they forget about it before it is entirely past them. Later, perhaps a mile further on, they overtake a woman walking alone. She is going in the same direction, up the hill toward the high farms. She's carrying a large basket over one arm and a smaller basket in the other hand, and she is dressed in heavy wool, a dark skirt that comes to her ankles, a thick jacket a grey wool shawl folded and pinned at her chest against the morning cold. She walks at a pace that is noticeably faster than the flock, and she glances back once as Thomas and the sheep close on her, and then she steps aside to let the flock pass. Her name is Mary. Thomas knows her. She's from the village a mile back, the wife of the wheelwright, and she's walking up to her sister's farm at the top of the lane with provisions, as she does every week, has done every week since her sister's husband broke his leg last autumn, and has not walked right since. The baskets contain bread and a dressed chicken and something wrapped in cloth that might be a small round cheese. She says, "Morning, Thomas." He says, "Morning, Mary. Good day for it." She says, "Better than last week." He says, "Aye." She watches the sheep go past, standing at the side of the road with her baskets held out and away from her body to give the animals room, and then the tail end of the flock passes her, Nell last of all, giving Mary a long look of assessment and then dismissing her as not relevant, and then she is behind them, growing smaller on the road, and Thomas walks on. These small transactions, these small, unremarkable encounters on an unremarkable road in an unremarkable morning, they are the warp and the weft of a community, not the dramatic events, not the births and deaths and court cases that might end up in a parish register or a newspaper, just the daily intersections, the nod, the good day for it, the baskets held aside to let the flock pass, the ordinary courtesy of people sharing a road and a life and a neighbourhood in the practical, unsentimentalised way that people have always done. Let the morning be a school, let the learning be gentle and unhurried. William is learning this road today, and he is learning it in the only way that such roads can truly be learned, by walking it. This is his third migration, but the first two were walked in a haze of inexperience, his attention consumed entirely by the mechanics of the task, keeping up with the flock, staying alert to Nell's movements, not tripping over his own feet on the uneven ground. He had no bandwidth left for absorbing the landscape, for registering the details that make the difference between a person who knows a road and a person who has merely walked it. Today he has slightly more capacity. Today some of the mechanical knowledge is becoming automatic, taking up less of his conscious attention, freeing it for other things. He notices, for the first time, the way the flock moves around the hollow in the road, the waterlogged hollow where a spring feeds into the track and the ground is perpetually soft. He sees how Fleet reads the ground ahead and adjusts her path slightly to the right, skirting the wettest part, and how the whole flock follows her line without anyone deciding to, without anyone communicating. The collective intelligence of the flock, he is beginning to understand, is real. It is distributed across the 437 animals, weighted toward the older, more experienced ones at the front, and it makes decisions that no individual animal could make as well alone. He watches Thomas, too, in the way that an apprentice watches a master, not directly, not with the obvious transparency of staring, but in sideways glances that catalogue information and store it. He watches how Thomas holds the crook, loosely, easily, the way you hold something you have held so long it has become an extension of the hand. He watches how Thomas's gaze moves, never fixing on any one point for long, always sweeping, always taking in the whole shape of the flock and the road and the land around it in a single continuous scan. He watches how Thomas communicates with Nell, The commands are mostly sounds, not quite words. An away for the wide out run to the left, a different sound for the tighter movement to the right, a low come by for the arc that brings her behind the flock, a soft steady that means slow down and be still. But between commands there is something else, a continuous, subtle communication that is not sound so much as body language, position, the angle of Thomas's attention. Nell is not simply obeying commands, she is reading Thomas the way she reads the flock, continuously, comprehensively, with the result that she often moves to exactly where she is needed a moment before Thomas gives any conscious signal, as if she and Thomas share some distributed form of the same intelligence that Fleet shares with the rest of the flock. William finds this extraordinary. He will not have the words for why it is extraordinary for many years, and when he does have the words he will express the idea imperfectly, as we all do when we try to translate something deeply felt into language. But the thing he is witnessing, this web of attention and communication and shared expertise, this thing that the road and the flock and the shepherd and the dog have together, it enters him today on this third migration and becomes a part of how he understands the world. He wants to be Thomas, not Thomas the man, not the house, the wife, the particular life, but Thomas the shepherd, the person who can stand at the edge of a field before sunrise and look at a flock of 400 sheep and know in 30 seconds that all is well. The person whose presence on a hillside reorganizes the behavior of animals as reliably as a magnet reorganizes iron filings. The person who knows this road the way Thomas knows it, not as information but as lived understanding, the kind of knowing that lives in the legs and the eyes and the hands rather than the mind. He is 16. He has time. The drove road makes a long sweeping curve to the right around the shoulder of a hill, and as they come around the curve the view opens up to the east, and William sees for the first time from this height the full extent of the valley below them. He has seen it from the ground, from inside it, all his life. But from up here it is different. The patchwork of fields, the dozens of shades of green and brown and the near black of freshly ploughed land, makes a pattern that he has never seen from this angle. The village in the valley bottom is tiny. The church tower, which in the village itself seems quite imposingly tall, is, from up here, a small, precise, rather endearing object, a child's toy left in a meadow. William stands still for a moment, looking at it. A ewe brushes past his legs, indifferent. Thomas does not stop. He glances back at William and sees what he is seeing, and there is a brief expression on Thomas's face that might be recognition, might be the memory of the first time he saw this view properly, might simply be contentment at someone else noticing what he notices. "Come on then," he says, not unkindly. William comes on. Let yourself be very still now. Let the image of the resting flock become very clear and very calm. Sheep at rest are something worth watching. Not because they are doing anything interesting, they are not, but because the quality of their not doing anything is very particular. It is a quality of deep, embodied settledness that has something almost instructive about it. A sheep resting in a field does not fidget. It does not check over its shoulder every few seconds or shift its weight from foot to foot. It does not, as far as can be observed, worry about what is coming next. It simply stands, or it slowly moves a few steps to reach fresh grass, or it chews, that slow, rhythmic, hypnotic chewing, and its body is at rest in a way that is very complete. Every unnecessary tension is absent. The muscles that are not needed for standing or chewing, or the slow swing of the jaw are simply off. The whole body, when a sheep is at rest, has a quality of deep, confident weight. You feel that if you put your hand on a resting sheep's back, you would feel the warmth of it, and the solidity of it, the living mass of it, all that bone and muscle and dense wool, resting its weight entirely on the earth. The breath of a resting sheep is slow and even. The ribcage rises and falls. In cold weather you can see each breath, a small plume, there and gone in the steady rhythm of an animal with nothing to prove to anyone about the speed of its breathing. They dream sometimes, not in the elaborate, scene-rich way that dogs dream, those twitching, whimpering, running-in-place dreams that suggest a full narrative experience. Sheep dream more quietly than that. You might see the eyes flicker behind closed lids, or the lower lip twitch very slightly, or the ears move in the absent way of ears that are registering something that exists only in the interior of the dreaming mind. What do sheep dream about? This is a question that no one in the 1830s is asking, because the question of animal consciousness and animal experience is not yet quite formulated as a respectable intellectual inquiry. The answer, even now, is uncertain, but perhaps, speculatively, gently, they dream about grass, about the smell of good pasture, about the warmth of the flock body pressed close on a cold night, that communal warmth that is one of the great practical advantages of being a member of a flock rather than a solitary animal. Perhaps they dream about movement, about the long, easy walk of a day when the weather is good and the road is firm. Perhaps Fleet dreams, in her sheep way, about arriving, about the high pasture and the short, sweet, concentrated grass and the big sky. Whatever they dream it in the patient, quiet way they do everything, and you can watch them if you sit still enough and look carefully, and it is one of the most peaceable things in the world. Let yourself drift a little deeper. The pace is very slow. The road ahead is long and gentle. Let the sounds of the countryside become the sounds of a world that is very far from anything that presses or hurries or demands. The drove road descends briefly into a valley, one of those dips I mentioned, one of the moments where the long climb toward the high ground must pause and negotiate with the geography, and at the bottom of this valley there is a river. It is not a large river. It is a river that could generously be called a substantial stream, perhaps 10 yards across at its widest, perhaps knee-deep in the middle at this time of year. By high summer it will be shallower, and by winter it will be fuller and faster. But now, in mid-April, it is a bright, quick-running thing, its water cold and clear with the snowmelt from the higher ground, and it makes a sound as it runs over its bed of rounded limestone pebbles that is one of the most soothing sounds in the world. Fords, crossings like this one, are an old art. The ford here is marked at its edges by 2 large flat stones, placed there by someone long ago as a guide to the correct crossing place, which is the shallowest and most level part of the riverbed. The stones are worn so smooth by generations of hooves that they look almost polished. They have been stepped on by sheep and cattle and horses and people for longer than anyone alive can remember. Fleet reaches the river and stops. She stands at the edge of the ford looking at the water. Thomas watches her. This is always the moment. Some flocks will cross a ford without hesitation. Others require encouragement. Fleet is the kind of lead ewe who takes 30 seconds to assess something before committing to it. Not from timidity, but from a kind of practical intelligence that Thomas respects deeply. She is not going to walk into a river without knowing what the river is going to do about it. She steps in. The water is cold. You can tell from the way she lifts her chin slightly as the water comes up around her legs, a reflexive response to the cold shock. She walks steadily across, her feet finding the riverbed carefully, one step at a time. In the deepest part, mid-river, the water comes up to her belly and she wades with her chin high, her expression one of dignified displeasure. She comes out the other side. She shakes herself, a shaking that begins at the shoulders and travels through her whole body in a wave, sending droplets of river water in a bright arc. And she walks forward onto the dry path and keeps walking. The rest of the flock follows. This is the magic of the led ewe. Once Fleet has crossed, the others know it can be done, and they do it too. In ones and twos and small clusters, stepping into the cold water with varying degrees of reluctance, crossing in a continuous stream, coming out the other side wet to the belly and shaking themselves and carrying on. It takes perhaps 20 minutes for all 437 sheep to cross the ford. Thomas and William cross on the stepping stones that someone, at some point, perhaps the same someone who placed the guide stones, has placed downstream from the ford. These stepping stones are flat and wide and reliable, and Thomas crosses them without breaking his stride, barely looking down. Nell crosses last after the entire flock is over. She crosses at the ford, wading through without hesitation, completely indifferent to the cold. She shakes herself on the far bank and takes up her position at the rear of the flock as if nothing has happened at all. The flock settles back into its ribbon formation on the far side of the river, and the drove road begins to climb again. The sound of the river recedes behind you as you walk away. It fades from a clear, rushing sound to a murmur, to a very distant whisper, and then it is gone, swallowed by the sounds of the road and the flock and the birds. Let the sun be warm on your face now. Let the image of the road ahead stretch out long and peaceful, upward into the hills, through a countryside that is beautiful in its complete indifference to whether or not you're there to admire it. The midday rest is longer than the morning rest. Thomas calls the halt at what he reckons is noon. He measures this not by a clock, because he does not own a clock, and not by the church bells that in the valley below have marked the hours every day of his life. Because up here the church bells are too far away, but by the angle of the sun, which at noon in April in the north of England hangs in the south at about 45 degrees, and by the deep familiarity of this route, which tells him that when the drove road passes the two old ash trees that stand on a slight rise to the left of the track, there they are, their new leaves still small and faintly purple tinged, that particular colour of new ash leaves in spring. It is time to stop. He finds a long level stretch of ground on the right side of the road where the verge widens and there is good grass, and he lets the flock spread out onto it. The sheep begin to graze almost immediately, their heads going down as one, the sound of their teeth cropping the short grass a soft collective snipping sound. Within 10 minutes, the flock is settled into its grazing pattern, not random, but with a loose structure, the individuals keeping their preferred distances from each other, the social hierarchy of the flock expressed in the small matters of who grazes in the best spots and who is content with the edges. Thomas lies down on his back on the verge. He does not often do this. He is a man who is very rarely entirely horizontal during daylight hours. But today is a good day, and the ground is dry, and the sun is warm on his face, and he is 34 years old, and his feet are tired. He folds his arms across his chest and looks up at the sky. The sky, from this perspective, is enormous. When you're standing and looking at the sky, the horizon cuts it in half, and your brain registers it as something finite. But when you lie down on your back in a field with nothing but sky above you from edge to edge, the sky seems suddenly infinite. It arches over you like the inside of an enormous dome, a dome that has no walls, that is open at every edge, and within it there are clouds, small white clouds, the high, feathery kind of cloud that forms in dry spring air, and they are moving very slowly from west to east, driven by a wind that is too high up for you to feel on the ground. Thomas watches the clouds. Nell lies beside him, close enough that he can feel the warmth of her against his left arm. She is still facing the flock, still watchful, but something in her posture has relaxed slightly, the way a professional might relax their shoulders during a calm moment in a long shift, without entirely letting go of their readiness. William, across the flock, is sitting against a dry stone wall, and if Thomas could see his face, he would see that the boy has fallen asleep. This is not dereliction. Shepherds know that the midday rest is for resting, and if a 16-year-old boy needs to sleep for 20 minutes in the warmth of the April sun, that is not laziness, but the simple, honest wisdom of a body knowing what it needs. The clouds drift, the sheep graze, the sun moves very slightly toward the west. Thomas thinks of nothing in particular. He listens to the flock and to the birds and to the far-off sound of a curlew whose long wavering cry comes drifting down from somewhere high up on the moor above them, a sound that to many people sounds mournful, but to Thomas sounds simply like the moor, like the top of the world, like the place they are going. Breathe out slowly. Let the afternoon begin. The afternoon walk is different from the morning walk. In the morning everything is a beginning. The world is waking up, the light is growing, the sheep are finding their rhythm, and there is a freshness to everything. The cold, the dew, the birds calling, that gives the day a quality of possibility. In the afternoon, the world has settled into itself. The birds have largely stopped singing. The sun has passed its height and is beginning its long decline. The shadows have started to lengthen, just slightly, just the first hint of the day's turning, a faint elongation of the shadows cast by the sheep themselves, those woolly shapes on the pale road. The flock, for its part, has found its pace completely by now. There is no more tentative feeling out of the rhythm, no more exploratory deviations at the edges. The sheep are simply walking. They are walking the way that animals walk, when the habit of walking has overtaken the consciousness of walking, when devotion has become simply what they are doing rather than what they are choosing to do. Their heads are forward and low. Their steps are metronomic. The ribbon of them stretches along the drove road in the afternoon light, and it is a beautiful thing, though no one is watching it as a beautiful thing. It is simply happening. The land has changed around them over the course of the day. The enclosed hedgerow and wall country of the low ground has thinned out. The hedges are lower and sparser here, and the walls are a different style, not the tight coursed stone of the valley farms, but a rougher, drier style. The stones stacked without mortar, in a way that looks almost casual but is in fact very precise, because a well-built dry stone wall will stand for centuries without anything holding it together except the physics of its own weight and the skill of the person who placed each stone in its optimal position. The grass is shorter here, not grazed short, just naturally shorter. The grass of hillside rather than valley, the wiry, tough variety that can withstand wind and cold, and the footfall of hooves and the cropping of deer, and still come back year after year, still be here in April when the flock arrives, still have that concentrated nutrition in its fibres that the valley grass, lush and watered as it is, cannot quite match. There are more birds up here, not songbirds. The songbird country is below, in the hedgerow land. Up here it is the open sky birds, lapwings, their distinctive tumbling flight and their extraordinary call, a sound like someone saying peewit in an exaggerated Welsh accent, calling from the rough ground to the left of the road. Meadow pipits, tiny and brown and almost invisible against the grass until they fly up in small bursts of panicked wings. Skylarks, if you are lucky, and you might be today, because the sky is clear and the air is still, and a skylark needs a clear, still sky to do what a skylark does. There, do you hear it? Somewhere above you, not far above you, maybe 30 feet, maybe 40, so high that you have to look almost straight up to see the tiny fluttering shape. A skylark, hovering somehow, in a way that seems to defy both gravity and common sense, its wings a blur, its whole small body vibrating with the effort of staying in one place in the air while producing a sound that is out of all proportion to the size of the creature making it. The song of a skylark is not a song in the way that a blackbird's song is a song, not composed of distinct phrases and flourishes. It is more like a continuous stream, a rushing, tumbling, ceaselessly inventive ribbon of sound that pours out of the bird for minutes at a time without a break, without an apparent breath, as if the skylark is simply a mechanism for converting height and air and spring into pure, formless music. The sound drifts down over the flock. The sheep pay no attention to it. Nell pays no attention to it. Thomas pays no attention to it, not consciously. But something in his face softens very slightly as the sound reaches him, the way that things which are deeply familiar and deeply good do not register as events so much as simply as the quality of the world being exactly as it should be. Let the afternoon lengthen around you. Let the light begin to take on that particular amber quality of late afternoon in spring, warm and horizontal and slightly hazy. The light that makes everything look as if it has been painted rather than real. There is a stone shelter on the high plateau. It is not a building exactly, or it does not have a door or windows or a complete roof. It is 3 walls of rough stone, roofed with a slab of larger stone that leans at an angle from the highest wall, and it is open to the south. It is called a shepherd's bield in some places, or a stell in others, or simply a wind shelter, and structures exactly like it have stood in exactly these kinds of places for as long as there have been shepherds on these hills. The one you are looking at now was built by someone who is entirely forgotten. His name, his face, the details of his life, all of it has been erased by time, and what remains is just the practical work of his hands. These 3 walls, this sheltering stone. Thomas leads the flock past the bield and stops. He is not stopping for the shelter. He is stopping because it is, by his judgment, the right place for the second afternoon rest, and because the ground here on the sheltered side of the bield is exactly the kind of ground, firm, dry, with a good cover of short sweet grass, that tired sheep appreciate. He sets them grazing on the slope and goes to sit inside the bield. Inside the bield, out of the wind, it is noticeably warmer. The stone walls have absorbed the day's sun and are releasing it slowly back into the small sheltered space. The floor is the natural ground, with a slight depression worn smooth by many years of shepherds sitting in exactly this spot, and there are the remnants of old fires, blackened circles in the ground, ash pressed into the earth. The ash is not from today, or this week, or even this season, but it speaks to the many other times this shelter has been used, the many other April and May and June days when some other Thomas, some other William, some other shepherd with a different name and the same tired feet, sat here in the last hours of a long walk day and rested and looked at his flock and thought his thoughts. Thomas does not light a fire. It is not cold enough, and he is not stopping long enough. He simply sits with his back against the sun-warmed stone and takes out his pipe. The pipe is a short clay pipe, very white when new, but now a deep cream colour shading to brown at the bowl, stained with years of use. He fills it from a small oilskin pouch of tobacco. Tobacco is not cheap, and what he smokes is a rough, dark variety, locally blended, very different from the fine Virginia tobacco that wealthier men smoke in the coffee houses of London. He lights it from a small tinder box, which involves a small piece of flint, a piece of metal, and a smouldering piece of char cloth that he nurses into a flame with breath alone, then touches to a spill of dry grass. The tobacco catches. He draws on the pipe. The smoke is thick and blue-grey, and it drifts sideways out of the open face of the bield and is gone. He smokes his pipe in silence. The flock grazes. The sun moves west. A wall of hills catches the afternoon light and holds it. This is peace. Not the peace that comes from the absence of problems. Thomas has many problems, as everyone does, as everyone has always had, as everyone will always have. A fence that needs mending, a debt that needs settling, a worry about the summer that is not yet here but is coming. No, this is the peace that comes from complete occupation, from the quiet alignment of a person and their work, from being exactly where you are supposed to be doing exactly what you were built for. It is, without Thomas having any particular framework in which to place it, a form of grace. He finishes the pipe. He knocks the bowl out against the stone wall, a small tap, and the dead ash falls, and he puts the pipe back in his smock pocket. Time to walk on. Let the day soften. Let the images become a little less sharp-edged, a little more like memory, a little more like the quality of light that comes just before the sun sets, when everything is golden and slightly unreal. The last miles of the migration are, in some ways, the most beautiful and the most difficult. Beautiful because the light is extraordinary at this hour. The sun is now angled low enough to come in under the clouds, if there are clouds, and to illuminate the hills from below and to one side, so that every blade of grass casts a tiny shadow, and the whole hillside has a texture that you would not see at noon. Difficult because the sheep and the shepherd and the dog and the boy are all tired in their different ways, and the road ahead, though shorter now than the road behind, seems longer in tired legs than it did in fresh ones. But the sheep know. This is the thing that Thomas has noticed every year, and that he cannot quite explain, because to explain it properly he would need a theory of animal memory and animal sense that he does not have the language for, and in any case he is not a man who needs things explained in order to accept them. The sheep know, in the last mile, that they are almost there. Something in the air, the smell of the high pasture perhaps, or the particular quality of the light up here, or the specific soundscape of the high moor with its curlews and its skylarks, and the way the wind sounds different when there are no trees to break it. Something tells them, and the pace changes slightly, not faster exactly, but more purposeful. The random deviations stop entirely. The flock tightens. Fleet's head comes up. Her step is just slightly more assured. The drove road passes through a gate. This is the gate that marks the boundary between the in-by land, the enclosed managed fields of the lower farms, and the common land of the upper moor, open and ungoverned and ancient. The gate is wooden, heavy, on iron hinges. Thomas opens it and the flock passes through. Beyond the gate the land opens up completely. The walls and hedges of the lower country are gone. The road ceases to be a road and becomes a track, and then becomes simply the direction that the land is easiest to walk, the line of least resistance up the final slope. The grass is short and pale and remarkably clean-looking, the way high moorland grass always looks clean, as if the wind keeps it polished. Fleet walks out onto the open moor and her step changes again. Her head comes up, her ears, which have been relaxed, folded slightly back all day, come forward. She's reading something in the air, in the ground, in some sense that is older than sight or smell or sound. She has been here before. She is home. Let yourself arrive. Let the journey settle into its completion the way a long, slow exhalation settles into stillness at the end. The high field is everything its name promises. It is high, high enough that from the upper end of it you can see, on a clear day, all the way across the valley to the hills on the other side, hills that are blue with distance, hills that seem to belong to a different world. The field is large, those 400 acres that Thomas knows well, and at this time of year it is still faintly purple-brown with the dead heather at its edges, but the grass in the lower parts is already bright and inviting. Fleet walks into the field and immediately puts her head down to graze. The others follow, not in the ribbon formation of the road, but spreading out now. The formation expanding, the flock dissolving from a long line into a wide, loose scattering of individual animals and small groups, each finding its own preferred spot, each beginning to graze with the deep, unhurried satisfaction of animals that have arrived where they were going. Thomas watches them spread across the field in the late afternoon light. He watches with the particular quality of attention that is not anxious but simply present, checking that all 437 are across the gate, that none have lingered behind, that all are grazing and none are standing with the particular look of a sheep that is not well. All 437. He counts them in his way, not one by one but in groups, the way experienced shepherds count, reckoning the flock in units of 5 or 10, his eye moving across the grazing animals with the practised ease of a musician reading bars of music, all present, all well. He allows himself a moment of something that, again, he would not quite have the word for if he tried. A moment of deep, uncomplicated satisfaction. They are here. The flock is on the high pasture. They will spend the summer here, growing their fleeces and their lambs and their solid hill sheep character, and he will come up twice a week to check them, and in October he will bring them down again, and that journey too will be its own quiet story. But for now, they are here, and so is he. William has sat down in the grass near the gate and has pulled off his boots. He is examining his feet with the expression of someone who has discovered that their feet are somewhat worse for wear but is too tired to be very upset about it. Thomas glances at him and says nothing, but there is a warmth in the glance that the boy catches and understands. Nell has not relaxed. She has in fact adjusted her working posture to the larger, more open space, ranging further out around the edges of the now spreading flock, her arc wider, her circuit of the perimeter longer. For her, the work does not end with the arrival. For her, the work simply changes shape. Thomas leans on his crook. He looks at the hills across the valley. He looks at the sky, which is beginning to take on the first faint gold of later afternoon. He looks at his flock. He pulls the stopper from his water flask and drinks. The water is cold, from a spring lower down the hill, collected this morning, and it tastes of the limestone it has filtered through, a clean mineral taste that is simply the taste of this place, the taste of this water, the taste of this landscape. He is satisfied. Let the golden light deepen now. Let the world slow down a little further. Thomas does not stay the night on the ice pasture. He will do that sometimes in midsummer, sleeping in the shepherd's bield or in the small stone hut that stands at the lower end of the high field, a hut that is very basic, very functional, with a low cot and a fireplace and a hook on the wall for a lantern. But tonight he is going home. The first night he always goes home. He needs Eleanor to know that the journey went well, and he needs the bed he has slept in for 12 years, and he needs, though he would not quite say this out loud, to see the baby. He leaves William in the field. William is 16, and perfectly capable of spending a night in the shepherd's hut, which he has done twice before, and which he regards as a significant marker of adulthood. They have brought provisions, enough for 2 days in case, and the hut has wood stacked beside it from the previous autumn. Thomas walks back down the road alone, or not quite alone. Nell is with him, of course. She walks at his heel now, her working day complete, her posture finally genuinely relaxed. Her tail wags at a moderate dignified frequency. Her ears are relaxed, her tongue is out. The drove road in the evening is different from the drove road in the morning. The light comes from the other side of the sky now, from the west, and it turns the world into a study in amber and gold and long shadows. The dry stone walls cast strips of shadow across the track. The sparse thorn trees at the side of the road are caught in the light in a way that makes each tiny new leaf visible, each bud just opening, each branch articulated against the pale evening sky. He walks the familiar miles. His body is tired, genuinely tired, the tired of someone who has walked 12 miles at the pace of a sheep with a 100-foot climb at the end, and he walks through this tiredness with the particular economy of someone who knows their own body's limits and trusts it to carry him where he needs to go. He does not hurry. He walks at his own pace, which is the pace he has always walked, steady and measured, a mile in about 20 minutes when he is not working the flock. The birds are singing again. The evening chorus is beginning, not as elaborate as the dawn chorus, but full enough. A song thrush, very close to the road, performing his characteristic 2 and 3 repetitions of each phrase, that insistent, methodical quality that distinguishes him from the more improvisatory blackbird. A wren, absurdly loud for his size, a tiny brown explosion of sound from deep in a bramble patch. The smell of the evening is different from the smell of the morning. The cold morning smell was sharp and mineral and clear. The evening smell is warmer, earthier, with more complexity, the way the end of a long day accumulates layers, the grass releasing the heat it stored from the sun, the hedgerows giving off a faint, sweet green smell. The smoke from the first evening fires in the farms below, rising in thin vertical columns in the still air. Thomas walks down toward those fires, toward the glow of them, which will be visible in the farmhouse windows when he gets close enough, toward Eleanor and the baby and the hot supper that will be ready, because Eleanor knows within an hour when he will arrive, and she has done this enough times to have the timing right, toward the familiar smell of his own kitchen, wood smoke and bread, and the mineral smell of the stone floor, and the living particular smell of a home that is used and inhabited and warm. He passes through the last gate of the day, the familiar lane, the familiar farmyard, the stones of it worn smooth in the particular pattern of 12 years of daily use. The light in the kitchen window. He opens the door. Let the warmth of the kitchen settle around you now. Let it be the last warmth of this story, the warmth of the ending. The kitchen is low-ceilinged and warm. The fire on the hearth is not a wildfire, but a settled, banked fire. The fire of the evening, after the heavy work of cooking is done and the heat has been brought down to just what is needed to keep the room comfortable and the kettle simmering. The glow of it pulses very gently, orange and red, throwing soft shadows that move across the walls in slow, rhythmic patterns. Eleanor is at the table. She has the mending on her lap, a shirt of Thomas's that has developed a tear at the elbow, the kind of tear that appears in a shirt that is worn every day, that has been washed so many times the fabric has begun to thin. She's mending it with a dark thread, her needle moving in the patient, economical way of someone who has been mending clothes for 20 years and no longer needs to think about it. The baby is on the floor near the fire, but not too close, sitting on a folded blanket. He is doing what babies do at 10 months old when they are tired but not quite asleep, looking at things. He is looking at his own hand, which he is holding up before his face, opening and closing it with the focused attention of someone who has recently discovered that their hand is a very interesting object. The firelight catches his fingers as he spreads them apart and illuminates them from behind, so that they glow slightly, pink and translucent, like the fingers of someone holding a lantern from inside. Thomas comes in and takes off his boots at the door and sets his crook against the wall and hangs his smock on the hook beside the door. Eleanor says, "Well?" "All up," he says. "All well." She nods. There is a great deal in this exchange. 437 sheep, 12 miles, 1 river crossing, 1 long day, all up, all well. She gets up and puts the mending aside and goes to the fire, where a pot of something has been keeping warm. Soup, most likely. It is almost always soup on a migration day, because soup can be made in the morning and left to itself all day and will be ready when needed. This one smells of leek and barley and the rich meaty smell of a bone stock. A stock made from a bone that has been simmering since yesterday evening and has given up everything it has to give to the water around it. Thomas picks up the baby. The baby looks at him with the direct, uncomplicated interest of someone who does not yet have the social training that makes direct looking seem rude. He reaches up and puts his hand on Thomas's chin, which he has recently discovered is an interesting texture. Rough and scratchy in a way that his own face and his mother's face are not. He pats the chin experimentally. Thomas sits down with the baby on his knee and reaches down to give Nell's head a single pat, which she receives with dignity. Eleanor sets the soup on the table. Bread, a piece of hard cheese, a cup of something that in another time and another context might have been called tea, but which in the 1830s, in a working farmhouse kitchen, is more likely a tisane of some kind. Dried chamomile, perhaps, or dried mint from the garden. Something warm and mild and good. Thomas eats. He eats slowly, because the day has been long, and the tiredness has settled into his bones, and because the soup is very good and deserves to be eaten slowly, and because the baby on his knee is heavy in a satisfying way, and because the fire is warm and the kitchen is familiar, and Eleanor is sitting across from him now with her own soup and the mending beside her, and nothing needs to be said. Nothing needs to be said. They have been married for 14 years. In 14 years you say eventually all the important things, and then you say them again, and then you settle into the knowledge of them, and the words become less necessary because the knowledge is simply present, the way the walls of the kitchen are simply present. You don't need to point at the walls to know they are there. The baby is asleep by the time Thomas finishes his soup. He has fallen asleep in the way that babies fall asleep when they are held. Not in a single definitive transition, but in a gradual subsiding. The eyelids growing heavier, the movement slower, the fist that was patting Thomas's chin slowly uncurling, the head dropping forward and then caught and settled against Thomas's chest. Thomas sits very still so as not to wake him. The fire pops very quietly. A log shifts, sending up a brief cascade of sparks that glow red and then go dark. The kettle simmers with a low, continuous murmur. Outside, the night is full of stars. The flock is on the hill, breathing slow in the dark, 437 individual plumes of breath rising and joining above the sleeping animals. William is in the shepherd's hut, probably already asleep, his boots off, his blanket pulled up. The high pasture is silent and cold and full of the particular piece of high, open places at night, where the sky comes very close to the earth, and the stars are very bright, and nothing interrupts the silence except a curlew calling once, far off, and then nothing again. And Thomas is here, in this kitchen, with this fire, with this child. He is very tired. His feet ache with a deep, bone-level ache that is not unpleasant so much as honest. The ache of a body that has done what it was built for and done it well. He feels, as he often feels at the end of a long migration day, the particular satisfaction of completion, not triumph, not relief, just completion, the comfortable settling of a day that has gone as it was supposed to go, the quiet rightness of a thing done as it should be done. Eleanor takes the sleeping baby from his arms and carries him to the crib that stands in the corner of the kitchen where it is warm. She settles him in with the ease of long practice, adjusting the blanket, making the small automatic movements of a parent who has done this many hundreds of times and whose hands know what to do before her mind has quite decided. She comes back to the table, she pours more tea, she picks up the mending. Thomas leans back in his chair. His hands are on the arms of the chair. His eyes are half closed. The fire burns. The baby sleeps. The mending needle moves in small, patient arcs. Outside, the stars are turning slowly above the high pasture, above the sleeping sheep, above the drove road and the river and the stone shelter and the hollow lane, above England, above the centuries. Let the warmth hold you. Let everything slow. Imagine for a moment that you are looking at England from very far away and very high up, not from a satellite. We are not there yet. We are still in the quiet long era before that. But from whatever vantage point the imagination allows, looking down at the island in the dark of an April night and seeing, spread across the hills and the valleys, the scattered lights of 10,000 farmhouse kitchens, 10,000 low-burning fires, 10,000 families in the last hour before sleep. And among those lights, one particular farmhouse in one particular valley. A farmhouse that is unremarkable in every detail. The same thatch, the same limestone walls, the same small windows, but which is, like every farmhouse, at the centre of its own complete and fully inhabited world. Tomorrow the flock will graze on the high pasture. They will spend the summer there, moving across the 400 acres in their unhurried way, their fleeces growing slowly through May and June and into July, when the shearers will come. Another day of organised, purposeful activity, another day of old skills and old knowledge, and the particular pleasure of watching difficult things done with apparent ease. The wool will be collected and pressed into great cloth sacks called sheets and taken to market, where it will find its way into the hands of weavers and spinners and eventually into cloth, into coats, into blankets, into the thick woolen stockings that are the daily armour of working people against the English cold. And then October will come, and the flock will come down again. 12 miles in reverse, the same road but different. The light in October is different, the land is different. The air smells of turned earth and wood smoke and the first serious cold of autumn. And Fleet will walk at the front of the flock again, her step as measured as it always is, knowing this road as she knows every road she has walked. And then another winter, and then another spring, and then the gate will open again, and Fleet will step out into the cold morning and lift her nose and read the air, and Thomas will walk behind her, and the migration will begin again, as it began the year before, as it will begin the year after, as it has begun every April since the first shepherd in the hills first noticed that the grass was better up high in summer, and that the cold came early to the high places in autumn, and that the sensible thing, the thing that the land itself seemed to suggest, was to follow the grass. You are connected to this, not by sentiment, not by nostalgia, but by something more fundamental. You are made of the same elements as Thomas. You breathe the same way he breathed. In, hold, out, the same rhythm, the same expansion and contraction of the same biological machinery. You feel tired at the end of long days. You feel the satisfaction of work completed. You feel the warmth of fire after cold, the comfort of familiar things after long journeys, the particular pleasure of setting something down at the end of a carrying, the way Thomas set his crook against the wall, the way Fleet put her head down on the high pasture, the way the baby's fist uncurled as he slept. All of these things are yours too. They have always been yours. The distance between you and that kitchen in 1830s, England is immense in terms of time and technology and the accumulated complexity of the world. But the distance between you and that tired man sitting by the fire with his sleeping child, the distance between you and that complete, ordinary, unremarkable satisfaction of a day done well, that distance is almost nothing at all. It is perhaps nothing at all. Let that thought carry you now. Let the distance between you and the past dissolve, very gently, like morning frost releasing itself from grass as the sun comes up. Let the warmth of all those fires, all those thousands of years of fires in all those kitchens, in all those farmhouses, on all those quiet evenings, let it reach you here, where you are, warm and still and resting. You have nothing to do right now. There is nowhere you need to be. The road is behind you. The high pasture is ahead. And for now, just for this moment, just for this quiet interval between the journey and the destination, you can rest. One more thing, before the night has you entirely. The wool from Thomas's flock, that particular spring's clip, from that April's flock on that summer's high pasture, ended up, as wool did in the 1830s, in many places. Some of it stayed close to home. Some was bought by a mill in a market town 20 miles away, spun into yarn, woven into cloth, cut and stitched into a coat or a dress or a pair of working trousers that was worn by someone entirely unknown, someone who lived their entirely unknown life and was warm in it. Some of it, a small portion perhaps, went further, found its way to a city, was worked by hands that had never seen a sheep, that had never walked a drove road the early morning dark, that had never heard the sound of 437 animals breathing together in a fold. And these hands made something useful from it, something warm, something that kept out the cold. And some person put on that warmth somewhere in the 1830s and felt its weight around their shoulders and did not think for a moment about Fleet or Thomas or a cold April morning or a river ford or a blackbird in a hedge. But the wool remembered, in its way, in the way that things remember, which is not the way of thought or language or the deliberate keeping of records, but the older, quieter way of simply continuing to be what they are. Wool that was grown on a hill by an animal that walked 12 miles in a day, in the company of a good dog and a tired boy and a shepherd who loved the world he lived in the way you love a thing you have always known, quietly, without declaration, as simply the way things are. It remembered, and it kept them warm, and so, tonight, are you. Breathe in, breathe out. The fire is low, the stars are out, the sheep are on the hill. Sleep well.